Sonia, are you okay just to keep an eye on the waiting room as a few come in? Yeah. Okay. Right. So so what we were looking at doing, we've obviously been doing a lot of classroom, a lot of online sessions over the last couple of years, and now sort of many of the lockdown restrictions have eased. People are starting to get back out into the swing of things, and we were sort of thinking we need to sort of try and make a bit of a not a total change in direction, but try and be a bit more proactive in getting out there and spreading the message around about trees, the benefits of trees, getting people engaged with woodlands, even just being out in the natural environment. And this month, next month, May, is a Walk in the Woods month. Now, if I can advance my slides. There we go. So we're encouraging people to get out and about and get active and enjoy the woodlands of Birmingham for a Walk in the Woods month. Somebody's got a speaker on in the background, haven't they? There we go. So yeah, Walk in the Woods month is actually a tree council initiative that takes place every May. The last couple of years, they've just been encouraging to get out where they can, when they can. But normally they try and help promote a series of organised walks taking place in parks, woodlands and other green spaces. This year, we're hoping to encourage you, so our tree champions, to lead a walk in a local wood or a tree-covered space and encourage others to get out there and enjoy trees and the woods around them. So I suppose this session really was like I say, following in from the last one, was a bit about sort of trying to think about what you need to think about when going to lay on an event that you might be inviting members of the public to, or whether that be, I suppose, members of the public to. So I suppose the first thoughts would be, where could the event take place? Well, obviously for this, we're talking about, a walk in the woods, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a woodland place. I mean, if it could just be, going somewhere like Cannondale Park, which does have areas of woodland, but just being in and amongst the trees, looking at the trees that are there, looking at the surroundings. So what sort of event should it be? Well, again, we'll come on to that, but there could be a whole series of themes. It could just be a general walk around, or it could be something more specific on a theme, which will be the next slide. Who would it be aimed at? Again, this sort of dictates a little bit about what the theme would be, or the theme might dictate who it's aimed at. So is it just going to be mainly for adults? Is it going to be for children, or is it going to be families, or anyone who comes up? So any of those combinations, and when as well. So is there a better time or date to do this? So I know that sometimes we could do events on a weekday in the school holidays, and that's been really good for families who are looking for activities to do. But if I was to do an event on, say, a Saturday morning, then maybe we might not get as many people of a particular audience, because that's the time when they go visiting their families, or they go shopping, or they've got something else on. So thinking about the time of day is useful. And again, those people that work might want to attend an event, so maybe it could be an afternoon or an evening walk, especially now we're getting to the lighter nights. Just going through about thinking about what sort of theme that event could be. So when we're talking about a walk in the woods, I mean, it is literally just any of that, really, I suppose. So it could just be a walk. It could just be encouraging people to come out and use a space that they might not normally enter into. It's surprising how many people won't go into a woodland because they're not sure of what's there, what the terrain's like, who might be around, what those sort of conditions. But going in with a group of people who are on an organised activity sort of helps overcome some of those fears perhaps that they might have, whether they be real fears or perceived fears of what they don't encounter. Some people don't like that sort of unknown aspect, and this is one way that we can encourage people to start to get more connected with the natural environment around them, by providing something with a bit more structure and a bit of leadership around there. Obviously, a walk in the woods could have a theme of looking particularly at trees, and while some of us are better at identifying trees than others, I don't think it really matters if you know what all the trees are, because for most people, they're just not going to know what many of the tree species are. And perhaps this could be an opportunity just to sort of say, have a look around you, look at the different bark patterns, look at the different branch patterns, look at the leaves. Just noticing that actually these trees are different is a really good part of this process. So, like I said, because most people don't recognise one tree from another most of the time. Flora could be a particular aspect of a walk. So it could be that we're going out in May, and obviously, so there's going to be lots of woodland wildflowers coming through. There could be things like bluebells, there could be wood anemones, there's going to be wood sorrel, there'd be things like dog mercury. So all these different woodland flowers that are there, and associated with the flowers and the trees is the fauna. So when we took a walk around the Licky Hills, we didn't sort of have a specific theme as such, but we did cover a little bit about what animals were about, what birds were about, the sort of insects, the flowers, the trees that were there. And again, this time of year, you're just be able to stand and listen in a woodland and take in those sights and sounds, just being able to stop for a minute, even if you don't know what the birds are called, what the bird song is. Again, recognizing the fact that there are different birds out there, the songs are different. You'll hear those variations. You can get people starting to, again, engage with nature. If it's a site that's local to you and you've got an interest in history, you might be able to throw in some historical facts around what's happening there. And again, this sort of adds to that conversation. Other people in the group might have their own stories. So this is a way of perhaps engaging other members of the community in what's in their surroundings, spreading that information, spreading that knowledge, that sort of that oral and history that so many of us sort of seem to miss out sometimes when it's because we're not documenting that. It could be that there's a particular art aspect to this. It could be if you're looking to engage families in an event, can you do bark rubbings? Can you do leaf rubbings? Could you do some earth art? Any of those sorts of things, just stop as an activity. This all sort of leads down, I suppose, to where we're getting to at the bottom, which is the mental health and well-being and sensory side of things as well. But maths also can be engaged in there, perhaps not the ideal thing for a walk in the woods unless you're particularly mathematically inclined, but some of the work that we've done as tree wardens, some of the aspects that we've looked at, looking at trees' ages, looking at how we measure those trees, can we measure the heights? If you're interested in things like fractals and Fibonacci numbers and all those sorts of things, you can introduce those. And these are just some of the aspects that you can introduce. So you can find something probably that relates to most people in any mixed group of that might attend an event. And of course, being out, perhaps probably the biggest thing that we can push here is that mental health and well-being aspect, and that comes with that sort of sensory side of things. So we'll just cover a little bit in a moment about Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, which the Japanese have been doing for many years. Like I say, in sensory side of things, the touch of different leaves. Some leaves are hairy, some are smooth, some are shiny, some are prickly. You've got smells, we've got scents from different leaves. If you look at some of the conifer species, you can crush the leaves and they either smell sort of like maybe like parsley or like lemon or grapefruit or quite sort of tangerine-y, clementine-y sort of type smells as well. So different sorts of smells all the way along through there, and not just the smells from trees as well, but the other plants on the ground. So if you've got things like hedge woundwort or wood anemones, they've got sort of slightly unpleasant odors when you touch those, when you crush the leaves. So you can use that sense of smell, and just sitting and taking that maybe a minute to sit with your eyes closed or stand with your eyes closed and just take in all the sounds from around you. Just listen to the variety of sounds. If it's a really warm day, the constant buzz of all those insects around you, you'll really sort of hear and sort of feel that. And these are things that many people, when they go for a walk in the woods, they're just walking along. They're not sort of really paying much attention to all of those sorts of things. So like I say, it's a bit of sort of grounding people, getting them more in touch, getting them to use their senses, things that they tend or perhaps don't realize that they're using on a day-to-day basis. These pictures here were just sort of, I suppose, a few things just to illustrate a couple of those points. So the top picture there in the top left-hand corner, that's a simple piece of earth art using found materials. So these are things that have naturally fallen from the tree that have been growing, or maybe there's a few that have been collected from low branches there. But use of sticks, stones, pine needles, pine cones, coloured leaves to create temporary art installations. And these are things that especially families and kids love creating, but you can get some people who are really involved in this and create some very intricate designs and examples, and they're great for other people to find as well. So it's a little bit of things that get left behind. You quite often find this on beaches where people have created stacks of stones and patterns with shells. So why not do the same in the woodlands? One of the things we talked about was some of the maths side of things, the fractals. So looking at the repeating patterns on leaves and vegetation. So that's the next photo across in the middle, on the top row there. The way that each thing is a division or a replication of the thing that came before. So it's dividing and dividing again, and it keeps moving down and down. Fibonacci numbers, I think, are fascinating. I'm not sort of really that into maths myself, but it's something I find quite interesting. So Fibonacci had this pattern of numbers, I suppose, that was it starts off with, if we look at this bottom right hand picture here, it's a sum of the previous two numbers. So we start with 1, and then it should actually be 1 and 1. So 1 and 1 is 2, 2 and 1 is 3, 3 and 2 is 5, 3 and 5 is 8, and so you go on like that. You actually go in a sequence, adding the previous two numbers together. And if you draw it out on a graph paper like this, you can see that you actually get this natural sort of spiral, this sort of golden spiral here. And when we look at things like pine cones, we can see that same spiraling pattern coming out from there as it expands out from there. These scales are in that sort of same spiral pattern. And in nature, we find a lot of Fibonacci numbers. So typically, I can't say you'll find it absolutely on every single one, but typically on a pine cone, the number of scales that are on a cone will be one of the numbers in a Fibonacci sequence. The number of seeds on a sunflower will be the number in the Fibonacci sequence. So there's a lot of naturally occurring numbers that fit this Fibonacci sequence. So it's quite interesting to be able to try and spot those, especially if you've got a bit of run of the numbers, but they soon rack up on there. Other things that we've done before now is sort of taking, this is where we go to sort of getting people grounded within the woodland and getting themselves to concentrate a little bit more on their surroundings. And we've done this with kids. It works quite well, actually, if you have a small hand mirror as well. But you can use the lines of the patterns in your hand, in the palm of your hand, to look to see whether you can find your tree, one where the branches form a similar pattern to the creases in your hands. And it takes a little bit of time, but invariably you'll find one where you can find some branches that match up to those creases. So a few different things there. Shinrin-yoku, though, that was something that's been really taking off, I suppose, over the last few years, and more people have been sort of taking part in this. I think many people probably have done this over the years, but without actually giving it a name. So Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, is the practice of spending time in the forest for better health, happiness, and a sense of calm. So it's a pillar of the Japanese culture for decades, and it's a way to reconnect with nature, from walking mindfully in the woods to a break in your local park, or perhaps even walking barefoot on your lawn in a natural way. So if we're looking at what you might do as part of this forest bathing, so so many people these days have got mobile phones on the go, that will have notifications coming through. They're playing sounds on all the time, something comes through. So if you want to spend that bit of time, maybe turn off the device, put it on silent if you can, give yourself that chance of relaxing, being mindful, and enjoying sensory forest based experience. Just slow down as you're walking through the wood or the forest, so you can see and feel more. Take long deep breaths. Extend that exhalation of air to twice the length of the inhalation. So if you've done any yoga or anything like that, you'll know exactly the same sort of thing. So stopping, standing, or sitting, smelling what's around you. What can you smell? Taking those surroundings. I see Steve sitting out in the garden today, so he's bound to be able to get that feel of any wind that's out there, get the feel of the heat or the warmth of the sun on you. Those are the sorts of things that you can take in. It's about trying to be more observant of what's around you. So many people, these days, we're just rushing around from one thing to the other. We don't take that time just to stop and observe and take things in. I'm sort of trying to block out all the other daily sort of demands of life. And then, it's about, staying as long as you can. It doesn't need to be a long time. Like we said, it could just be starting with a minute, just taking that 1 minute. And when you stand with your eyes closed and you just immerse yourself in the sounds and the general experience of the woodland, 1 minute can actually seem quite a long time. So it's interesting though to start with. So that's just one thing that can be done. It's a very simple exercise, but it's going to engage people. Then if we're looking at sort of planning a walk or an activity in a woodland, I suppose we need to think about what location we're going to use. And this might dictate the theme or vice versa. So you might have a woodland that doesn't have a natural resting space and you've got, pathways that lead through. You might have a park space that doesn't have a lot of trees, but you can move from tree to tree. So you might focus something more on being under that tree or looking at the trees as a species, the different species, trying to identify them, seeing those differences. I know Helen, I don't know if she's on the call today, but they were going to do something with their urban sketching group and go out and actually visit a woodland, walk through that, and then do some sketching as well as part of that. One of the things I think we need to think about is about who owns the site as well. So if you're going to go to a local park space, because we'd be looking at running a public event, so inviting members of the public along, we do need to think about who owns that site. Do we need any sort of, while it's okay for us just to turn up and undertake an activity, go for a walk ourselves, if we as an organisation are inviting other people to a site, it's always useful just to sort of check with whoever owns the site that there's not a problem, that there's nothing going to be on that day that might clash with that. The number of times that somebody might go, I mean, I used to work at places like Cannon Hill Park, and somebody go, oh, I've organised an event for this day, only to find that it was the International Pipe Bands Championships that were on, and we're expecting 2,500, 3,000, 4,000 people to turn up. So it's not necessarily that your activity is going to be a problem, but just sometimes you might need to consider what else might be going on, especially if there might be some kind of maintenance work maybe going on site, or you've got restricted access to those parts. So just useful on that respect. And again, because these are public events as well, Birmingham Tree people have got insurance that will cover us, the public liability insurance, but we also need to just check that we have the okay from whoever the landowner is, and that way then our insurance is valid for that process. So we've already mentioned there about checking for other events or activities on the same day. Would this be an issue? I mean, I know Dave and Veronica are on the call today, so they do all the management work and look after Wesley Vale Millennium Green down there, so they'd have a good idea of if there was anything else planned for their own site there. But if it's something in your local community, you might not always know, but we can't always find out everything, and again, not everybody says, do they? So you do the best. If you know the site well, then maybe you don't need to do a visit beforehand, but if you're it's always useful to go think about, because if you visit a site on your own, you might not necessarily think about some of these other aspects. So visiting the site, thinking about a meeting point. What's a good place to describe as a meeting point? Have you got somewhere, just inside of an entrance? Have you got a car park? Have you got an open space that you could use? Sometimes these sites, if they're straight on the side of a road, you don't really want a lot of people gathering on a main roadside. So maybe you might be able to find an alternative location. Does it have any facilities there? If people are going to be traveling to this site, do we need to think about toilets, etc.? Hopefully, what we're looking at is people delivering something local on their doorstep. So these are people who might be within 5-10 minutes walk, 15 minutes walk or something of the site. So actually, we don't need to think so much about that, because if they need to go, they can go back home if they. Thinking about the routes as well and about accessibility. Now, I suppose I've done so many walks over the years. I sort of forget about this sometimes, because you're sort of walking along and then you think, oh yes, I've got these steps here, or I've got this narrow point, this ditch to cross. And again, if you've got family groups coming out, would you have somebody who might be bringing a pushchair along? So, is there an obstacle that they might need to think about? Well, we will need to give somebody a hand over this if there is a wheelchair or a pushchair, or is it a bit steep? How are the steps? you know, or I mean, in some circumstances, if you're going out into the wider countryside, a stile or a gate or something, you know, gives you the chance to look for points of interest or you know, and stopping points, natural stopping points. You know, when you've done a number of walks or you know a site really well, you can just pick out what you see as you go along. You probably won't need to think about specific points. But if this is the first time that you're ever going to do or thinking of delivering a walk, it's always useful to have a few points of interest that you know where they are, that you know what you're going to be saying, just in case nothing else sort of springs to mind as you go along. As those who came with us on to the Lickies will know, think about how long it's going to take you. You know, I intended to do a nice walk round. We said we were going to be there for 2 hours. After an hour, we still hadn't left the Arboretum at the front of the visitor centre at the Lickies. So we then spent the next hour doing a bit of a walk round. But, you know, I think either think about, if you're walking around, you're looking at things, think about that time and then maybe double it, or consider maybe halving the route. And you can take some of that thought as well as you're going around. Just keep an eye on the time. You know, how are you doing? Have you got an alternative to cut out part of the route if you need to, if you're running short on time, or could you add something in if you find you're a little bit ahead of schedule? Considerations about the weather as well. So again, you know, most of the time we probably don't give much thought to this, but if you're going to be taking a walk in the woodlands and on the day it's blowing a real gale, it may be an idea to sort of think about not putting that event on. You know, that while woodlands are generally fairly safe, you know, when you've got strong winds like that, you do get bits of debris falling from trees, which is a natural occurrence. And, you know, we don't really want people being hit with, you know, with debris and stuff like that. If you're in a more slightly open park space, then maybe you've got an option not to stand directly under the trees, and so you might still be able to go ahead. If it's been particularly hot and sunny, or it is, you know, we might need to think, you know, about taking advantage of some of those shadier spaces. Or if it's been raining, you know, has that affected the underfoot conditions as well? Has that, you know, created areas that might be very wet or boggy? Did we intend to cross a stream, for example, you know, using stepping stones or a small bridge? Might that be underwater? So we might need to think about whether we can go around that. And of course, then there's the things like the dreaded risk assessments to think about, you know, but don't worry about that for this case, because we'll have one that we can share out in that aspect that covers that. Risk assessments, really, I don't find particularly that challenging. I mean, having had to do so many of them over the years, you can have a fairly straightforward risk assessment that just covers some of those basic points we were mentioning there about planning the walks. So in planning the walk, I would just say, you know, if you're going to deliver a public event, there's a few things that, you know, you can run through. These two things here, we've got one little bit of a risk assessment and one of sort of a bit of a safety talk guidelines. And these are the first bit, the safety talk guidelines, is more of an aid memoir, really, I suppose. It's not sort of thing that you'd expect to stand there and read out, but it's just for you to give yourself a little reminder about sorts of things that you need to say when sort of starting to go out with a group. So this is the sort of thing that we'll have available, whether we're going to be doing a walk, whether we're going to be doing some tree planting activities, or whatever going forward, especially if we're, you know, having a bigger group of people. So if we just run down through those, so it's like making sure that have done sort of the followings. Have we thought about how we're going to communicate with people? Have we got some opportunity to, you know, make a phone call, or can we get somebody to go for help if need be? You know, have we thought through about the activity guidelines or risk assessments? Do we need any PPE? Well, for a walk in the woods, you're not really going to need any PPE on, are you? You know, good shoes, trainers, you know, if the weather's dry, is going to be good enough. And are the participants appropriately dressed? So again, walk in the woods, as long as the weather's fairly mild, most of what people are wearing generally is going to be fine. If we're in the middle of the winter and we're going to be doing tree planting activities and they turn up in a pair of pumps and you know, a t-shirt, then that's probably not appropriately dressed to undertake tree planting in the winter. They're going to get cold, they're going to get wet, they're going to get dirty, and when they do that, there's a risk of accidents occurring. So, you know, it's all by degrees, really, dependent on the weather. Something that I know I used to do and have still done, because you get so carried away sometimes talking to people who turn up. You get a few people turn up, you start a conversation with them, then a few more turn up and a few more turn up, that actually you sometimes forget to introduce yourself and what the activity is. But it's always good just to remember, just to stop before you start out, make another introduction to yourself, point out anybody else who's coming along to help you. So if there's two of you going and doing the walk, if somebody's leading the start, having that, doing the introduction, don't forget to introduce everybody else. Give a bit of indication of how long that's going to be, why the activity is taking place. So, we're Birmingham Tree People, we're the tree wardens for Birmingham, or we're urban foresters if you prefer, or tree champions. We're trying to get people engaged with trees, woodlands around them, get them to appreciate them more. And that this month, the month of May, is Walk in the Woods month, and it's a way to get people to connect with trees and woodlands after the winter that we've had. I don't think for this we wouldn't necessarily have to have a register of participants. It's always useful for us to know as an organisation if anybody turns up, and if so, how many, because it's good to be able to report back to the council on the work of the volunteer groups that are out there, and how that reach is having an impact on local communities. Perhaps maybe might be useful to know if somebody has any particular medical needs. Hopefully these are not going to be lengthy activities, they're not going to be strenuous, you're not going far. It's not like we're doing a 5 or 10 mile walk across the local countryside, so we don't necessarily need to, it's probably not essential in that there. And because we're not doing anything like tree planting, or there's not really going to be much of a need to wash their hands at the end of activity, unless you've been getting them to touch or feel plants, if they've got some of that residual smell on their hands. Not in the building, so we're outdoors. Again, this is the part of the risk assessment. The risk assessment really is the thing that says we've considered what the potential risks are. We've considered who might be harmed, what we are going to do to try and minimize the risk, and any further action that might be required. So when we look on here, possible risks of trips or falls, and the terrain and obstacles. So here we'd just be saying at the start of a walk, or as we're going round, pointing out a change in terrain. So if there's a big step up, you might just want to say, well, watch the step up here. Watch out for the tree roots. It's a bit uneven here. It's nothing major really. And that's the control measure that's going to be in place, highlighting those things. You're undertaking what we would call a dynamic risk assessment. You've got these things in your head. You're thinking about it as you're going along. You're at the front of the route. You're seeing the terrain as it comes up and just passing on that message, just to take a note of what's underfoot. You've got to step over something. You've got to duck underneath something. It really is that simple most of the time. Just pointing that out. That makes sure you're covered, and make sure everybody else is covered as well. We're not going to be in a vehicle, we're not using equipment, but again, if we were doing something like that, if we're doing an activity, tree planting in the future, then a safety talk on each item being used, so the spades and forks. But that's not going to be the case here, unless you're doing something very arty and you're taking some equipment with you. But I don't expect any of us to be thinking about that. And just sort of say as well that if somebody does start to feel unwell, to let them know, let you know, or let somebody know as the leader or assistant for the group, and if they have any general concerns, to do that. And at the end of the activity, again, sum up if there's anything to say. Thank people for coming on the walk. Let them know who we are. And again, if there was a need to remember to wash hands, etc., then just say that. And as long as everybody's gone, that's fine. So it's not that complex a thing, really. I don't think it's can be daunting for people who've never led a walk before, but it's not overly hard, I don't think. And I think things to consider as well are, I still have to do it after all the years of me having led walks. Is there'll always be somebody who asks a question about something that you don't know the answer to, and being able to turn around and say, I don't know, but we'll look that up. If you've got the opportunity to look it up, or take the details, and we'll see if we can find out and get back to them on that. You know, people do understand that you can't know everything, and like I say, this really is about getting people to start to get out and use woodlands that perhaps might not have been done before. So what are we asking really? I suppose we're asking, have we got anybody out there amongst our tree wardens who is happy to volunteer, or either individually or as a pair or as a small group, to offer to run a walk in the woods during May? If you are, can you let us know who you are, where you'd like to do that? We can help advertise that activity. If you're a local group already, so Dave, Veronica, you know, you've got friends of West of Millennium Green. If you're going to be putting on an event as part of your group and you want us to help advertise that, great, let us know. It doesn't necessarily have to be direct for us, but we can help advertise the fact that you're going to be doing something in a woodland or tree related in May. We can help people find a site if they need help doing that. I'm happy to help sort of give an indication of what sort of things you might be able to include. So anybody who wants to volunteer, when, where, we can help advertise.